Top of the morning, everybody. I hope we're all doing well. It is a beautiful day here in the South Carolina Low Country. Looking forward to a nice day. Taking it a little easy today. Dana Dahlquist, there he is. A man on a mission. We've got him up early. Let's see what he has to say. Looking forward to this session. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Dana, top of the morning.
Good morning.
Are you out for an early morning drive?
Yeah, no, actually, people are sleeping at my house. So not only,
You're a good man.
and I figured it's a good place. I got a coffee shop behind me, and I'm in Seal Beach, so not bad. I was
You're
gonna
a
do
good
the
man.
intro. I was gonna do my intro with my my mask, my camo mask that my wife made for me.
Oh man,
anyway,
how you guys holding up, Dana? You guys doing okay?
everything's good. Everything's good. Yeah. How about yourself?
You know, no problems. The golf course that I teach at has been open,
Oh,
and
right on.
yeah. But I've been doing like one day a week of 4 1 hour lessons. You know, like pretty much four lessons a week from 6 feet away, and really not much to speak of. But I think we're starting to get slowly opened up on this side of the planet.
Cool. Right on.
Yeah.
Right on. Yeah, we have other counties that are opening. So we have Riverside County, and I think they're opening. I know Ventura opened. I think it was yesterday. So
Okay.
LA will probably be one of the last in the state,
I would imagine, yeah.
likely. But yeah, other than that, we need to be golfing.
Yes. Tell me about it. It's you know, Terry was saying yesterday, if this could have kicked in at a different time, as if we had a choice, it would have been certainly better. But
Yeah.
it is what it is. You know, it's the weather's getting good. I know everyone's going to be super fired up to play golf and take some lessons and hopefully play some good golf.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Cool.
So Dana, this morning I wanted to touch base with you and just do a little bit of a deep dive on controlling the club face, repeatability. I think in my take, and I'd love to hear yours, the number one most important attribute for any golfer is the distance that they hit the golf ball. If I flush a driver and it goes 128 yards, no matter how good I am or how solid I hit it, I'm not going to be good. I'm just not going to be able to deal with the challenges that each golf course presents.
Yeah.
So once we've got a measure of distance, it doesn't have to be too long. It just has to be long enough for us to either be able to enjoy ourselves or compete at the level that we're at.
Yep.
But number two, we must be able to, through that 1/2000th of a second window that we call impact, we must be able to a certain degree, manage the club face.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that take?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's a very challenging conversation to have with, I think, for a student, because it automatically goes into like a rigid concept, right? And so it's how you kind of build that in. And, you know, I have my take on it. And, you know, when we look at club face, I know we've had an interesting article come out this last week about that Sasha did on, you know, rated closure and things like that. And I think like that's really good for you and I.
Yeah.
And but at the same time, when we have a student that comes in and they go, well, you know, Phil Mickelson's doing this with his club face. You know, granted, I understand Phil Mickelson's kind of a special person, without it going to his head too much, but it's what does the average player need to learn from that? And I think that's kind of what you're bringing up here. It's like I need to be able to have the face somewhat pointing in the direction I want to start that golf ball. And I think that even goes all the way into putting. I mean, we don't want that thing going all over everywhere. So I think that's just the baseline of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a couple of takeaways from that rate of closure article, and if anyone didn't see that, I would encourage you to seek it out. There's a couple of good threads on Twitter, and I think it was golf.com that pushed it out. But if you go and give that a read, essentially what Sasha is saying is there's nothing we can take from rate of closure at the moment.
Yeah.
These are the minimums, these are the maximums, and here's how it really works. And I really do think that when we get golfers, and you see them and I see them, and it's typically better players that get this flip action going. They get their hands working, and effectively the club face over rotating through impact, simply because what they're doing requires it. Let's put that on the table. They're required. If they don't do that, they've got no chance of hitting it at the target.
100%. Yeah, okay. You pretty much, I think you nailed that. You couldn't say that any better. I think I had a lesson online yesterday, and the student was, opening the club face, forearm rotation, left wrist extended, laid off. I mean, all the things you're just going, oh my goodness,
this is going to get under and they're going to have to fling it.
Yeah. So to your point, there is management of the club face, right? One aspect of it. And, if we were to measure potentially the pitcher, I'd say measure in a 2D sense, potentially it would look like it would have less rate of closure in a 2D sense. So I think that's something we need to kind of correlate, is the difference between the two. On 3D, and obviously speed has a lot to do with this, but she's managing this face that's just, it's required, like you said before, requiring way too much manipulation to try to create control. So yeah, that's I like when requiring things in your golf swing it means adding to.
Yes, complexifying.
Yes,
we're complexifying the whole golf swing, and a lot of people do that certainly unknowingly, not intentionally. That's just the way things are. And one of my takeaways from Sasho's article was, look, we don't really, there are high rates that are good and low rates that are good. And I had an offline discussion with Sasha where I said, Sasha, wouldn't it be cool if we could someday flush out the role of skill? Because when I look at Phil Mickelson, I see mega skill.
Yeah.
Phil is highly, highly skilled. Yeah. And it's those fine, precise motor skills that he's learned and honed over the years, seemingly better than anybody else, so that he can play with this apparent really high rate of closure and get it done. He seems to be streaky with it. We know that. But he's done pretty well for somebody whose technique is seldom used as a model.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I don't know any other way to kind of break that down. I mean, at some point, the Ferrari, you take the wheels off, it's still a Ferrari. Just change wheels. So, yeah, it's quite an interesting one. I think now on the flip side of that, I know, and I'm probably, we might say like guilty party of this, is like I have a preference of particular two-dimensional looks, and being as such, it gets particular results, right? So like if I have a guy who, is really late at the bottom and slightly open and he goes this way, I'm going to pretty much affect that in some way in his golf swing to eliminate that. And by and large, I've found that it's more consistency of not only dynamic loft and direction, but even of strike. So I think that's kind of a big one. And like, you've done a lot of work in the wedge department, right? Yeah. So, and being that you've done that, you would probably say that, I mean, to get the numbers pretty tight, probably a good strategy too. Like you wouldn't have that thing going all over everywhere.
For sure.
So, yeah, it's an interesting one for sure.
I think also, what's interesting to note, and this was another takeaway from Sasho's article is, and I suspect it's why most often people will hit chip shots, pitch shots, pretty close to on line. It's not often I meet someone who goes, well, I'm striking it beautifully, I just can't get it on line. And so I'm talking wedges.
Yeah.
And so when we've got a 50-yard pitch shot, people will most often get the club face pointed pretty close to where they want, or certainly close enough. If they can strike it appropriately with some good speed, the ball's going to go the right distance relatively on line. And
Right.
so the slower we swing, the easier it is to manage that club face angle through impact. But swinging slow doesn't really work for us when it comes to long game, full swings. And so as a result, we need to turn up the gas speed-wise, but we still need to find a way to manage that club face. Dana, if I held your feet to the fire a little bit here and said, come on, give me some pointers. I'm struggling with controlling my club face through impact.
Yeah.
And what are factors that I can do to get that club face to be more predictable? Never going to be perfect, more predictable.
Yeah. So first thing I would kind of discover if we don't have obviously a contact issue, I'll just take that out of the equation.
Let's
right?
say they're hitting it solid.
Yeah. So I would say the first and foremost is kind of understanding how there's a relationship between the sweet spot and the handle, and how that handle travels and the sweet spot travels kind of on a ellipse or an arc, if you want to call it an arc.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the baseline of this. So if I get that baseline under control, I know how the handle moves up, back, and around relative to that sweet spot. When we look at most players, and I'm looking at it from an amateur standpoint.
Sure.
It's almost like a throw that they try to employ.
Yeah.
And that throw disrupts where that sweet spot and handle goes. And now, obviously, we might have a rate of closure issue, but we also have an extension wrist angle issue.
Yeah.
So I think that in and of itself, I mean, if the lead wrist is going to extension too fast, we're going to obviously have a distance issue, and we're going to have, spin loft issue and dynamic loft issue, kind of all in that same realm.
Yes.
But for the player, and I think that's kind of number one. Now, as far as the face opening and closing, generally speaking, it's somewhere within the downstroke what the wrist angle is doing. So is the wrist angle in extension too early for too long, and then does it roll? Maybe create a reversal of fortune there. But I think really the number one thing is really that relationship of, the sweet spot, COM, and the handle.
Okay.
That's how I do
it. And so you would, obviously we need to, as coaches, we need to understand club path, spin loft, which is really vertical face to path relationship, and then that horizontal face to path.
Yeah.
But you're saying that handle path really plays a big role in that.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think if I was a new teacher and I wanted to get people better pretty quick as for direction, I would understand that. Because if I use the old, and this is from my experience, this isn't necessarily correct, but if I go, so if I said just swing to the right, because you're swinging too far left, I could swing right, and that handle can keep going to the right. And I never really get the face to line up the way it needs to. And so if the best players in the world have that under control, you want to kind of, control is a bad word, but if they're able to produce that more often, that would be probably a good idea to have that relationship kind of in my memory bank on how to do it. So, it's, and this is where golf is kind of in a beautiful place, because when we can articulate, your swing direction's to the right, and how that's being formed, right? Today we can do that. I think that's a beautiful thing.
That is cool. Dana, have you ever seen a tour caliber golfer with the handle at the moment of impact? And I'm most likely this is 2D I'm asking here, because you and I kind of live in the video camera world where we're teaching players out on the tee and we're not doing so much measuring. We've done some. You've done, I'm sure, more than me. But have you ever seen a high caliber golfer with the handle traveling outward at impact?
the high, okay. More, not exactly, but somewhat more than
Yeah.
what preferred. And generally,
Would you say, is another way to say that it was traveling less inward than I preferred,
yes.
but would you
Yeah.
say it was traveling out? I don't,
Yeah. Yeah.
I see
So,
where the line you're walking there.
yeah. So like the handle would appear in 2D that the hands would go in a straight line and the club would wrap left really quick. And, and
Yes, yes, yes.
the player was actually hitting fades
Okay.
from there. So
Okay.
in my mind, I would think of Mark O'Meara when he won Augusta, and you see the driver where the club's going left and the hands are going in a straight line.
Yeah.
That's at least the picture in my head at the moment. But what was ironic, the player can only draw the ball by aiming it severely to the right. And
That's interesting.
yeah, it was that was how he neutralized it. And he was a good driver of the golf ball because that left wrist was going into extension so quickly. No, it's not
Yeah.
BJ.
BJ, yeah.
But good example there, right? So, but that's a viable pattern. Now, what was very interesting, the player actually struggled with wedges.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Enough, right? So, he needs to go see Andrew Rice on that one.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of handle going up, in, and around for sure.
Yes.
In the swings, I think early days Justin Rose had that look of the handle, the hands chasing down the target line for a little bit too long. I think he had that look. And if you take a close look at Brooke Henderson or Lexi Thompson, I think Lexi might have the handle going out.
Yeah.
Brooke Henderson, I think, actually gets it going in and then it goes back out.
Yeah.
Just post impact.
Yeah.
But certainly those two ladies and Justin Rose in that era, he doesn't do that anymore. But in that era, I thought had their handles traveling out. And to me, what is, in your take, Dana, what's the issue with, because I know a lot of golfers, and there's golfers watching this who are going, I need to swing down the target line. Mm-hmm. I need to extend down the line. Okay, that's how I'm going to hit it straight. And I know I over the years, you've taught a lot of young professionals. I've taught a lot of young professionals. And the shot that will get somebody out of chasing the dream of playing professional golf is that mystical draw, that mystical hook where the player feels like they're really holding it down the line. They're not really letting the face go, but that ball gets up there and falls to the left and the player goes, that felt like a fade. It felt like I held it off, but the thing hooked. What is, how important is getting rid of that to you?
Well, so kind of as a strategy, I can kind of illustrate this the best that I can. So a lot of times, if so we obviously have a VSP, vertical plane, swing plane dilemma here. And so what occurs is the player, starts their path too far to the right, whether or not it's like an axis issue where they're tilting back and swinging to the right.
Yeah.
And, that's generally what you see with a better player. And so what they start doing is start trying to swing more and more to the left. Mm-hmm. And, so once you kind of move their axis into a better spot, I actually have people feel like they're swinging out, but because their pivot is so well or better, and the left shoulder is moving up, back, and around, they can feel like they're swinging out and releasing it, and then hit a pretty straight to slight draw. Now it's funny because this goes back to a particular time. I think it was 95. Okay, and Mark Brooks was a drawer of the golf ball, right? And disregarding his swing, but he said something at some point, and I can't remember where it was. One of his keys was he felt like he was swinging down the line. Well, come to find out, he kind of
looked like it. He looked like he had that lots of extension through there with the arms. Yeah,
but he kind of still had his pivot moving it around, even though it went a little bit out. So now, technology over the years has kind of created understanding around that for 2 to 3 years, I struggled with what that actually meant, right? So it was like my definition in my head had to get rewritten because that belief that I had was completely inaccurate. But to Mark, it was correct, right? What his feels were. But I would say that would be the big one is first you have to correlate what that down the line means, because it means something different to me than might be the person sitting there.
Well said. Yeah.
So, and that's a big part of that. But yeah, if somebody generally hits like a quick overhook, it's definitely like this is back, this is stopping, this is up, and it goes left pretty quick.
Yeah.
Generally, what I see.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean get steep on it, hit slices.
Correct. It really is amazing how actually, and getting back to some rate of closure, I think particularly in that younger, better player crowd, not always, but typically, that player that's struggling with hitting those balls that curve a little too much, and every now and then they're going to overcurve one to the left of their target, speaking from a right-handed perspective, they seem to, from a 2D perspective, they seem to hold the club face. And that's why I like what you said. You want them to feel like they're actually going to release it. They're going to let that club head go. Like, to me, Freddie Couples, Ernie, VJ, they all have a look like they're really releasing it like crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's with that player that's struggling with that, the club head tends to stay out and down the target line too long.
Right.
And the face is almost held off, and that's what causes that ball to overdraw. Yeah.
And we can go flip side. You look at DJ, Victor, and Colin, where their left wrist is in flexion. It's got to head that way. It's got to go the other way.
Yeah.
So, I think definition of release as it relates to rated closure is an important subject matter. I don't think it's something that we should be, and maybe I'm pigeonholing myself by saying this, but I'm just not a fan with a full swing of trying to hold anything off. I just think that slows the whole system down, and you can't apply it.
Yeah. Dan, is this not true? I think we may have heard something along these lines at Coach Camp last year when you were there, and correct me if I'm wrong. Victor has the most of that on the way down.
Yep.
And he is going the fastest of anyone from that position to that position, obviously post-impact. But his wrist is moving faster than anyone has ever been measured before from there to there.
Yes.
Okay. And so he's really getting his wrists moving. Let's just stick with lead wrist. He's really getting his lead wrist moving a lot through impact. Fast.
Yes.
Would you say, if you look at his club face through impact, would you say he has an active club face or a passive club face?
2D passive.
2D passive. As quiet as I've ever seen.
Yeah.
As quiet as I've ever seen.
And I think Sinclair said that on his database, it's the slowest rate of closure he's had.
And just looking at it, I would hope he would have a slow one, because it certainly doesn't look flippy or fast at all. I
don't know the number, but I think the number was around 900. It was under 1,000 with a driver.
That's low. That's really low. Yeah. And I think that message, and that's really why, part of the reason why I wanted to go down this hole, is golfers perceive quiet wrists, quiet face.
Yeah.
And Victor has the fastest traveling lead wrist through impact out of anyone measured. And he has one of the quietest club faces. And so we need to, and instinctively, I think as golfers, that's part of the reason why golf is hard. When you hit it left, you swing more right.
Yeah.
And when you swing more right, you hit it more left.
Right.
And when you try to quiet the face, you keep your hands quiet. And as you try to quiet the face causes the ball to curve more.
Right.
And that's, in my estimation, why this game is so difficult, particularly at the top level, because our instincts typically lead us down the wrong trail.
Right. 100%. 100%. And
Yeah.
you know, these guys are gifted, and they have a lot of stuff in their database, in their head of experience. And when they start, you know, going fast, it succumbs to that athletic profile. And so any of us coaches that might introduce some concepts, you know, it takes a long time for that concept to kind of wire. And if you say, hey, you know, Keegan Bradley, your rate of closure is too fast, I want you to feel this. If I just say rate of closure and hit a punch shot, well, he stands up there with a 5-iron, he's not going to do it. Like, it's just not going to be in his, he might do it on the range a couple times, but it's just not going to happen. So
Yeah.
I think, and there's a funny thing, you know, there's this kind of a viewpoint of Tommy Fleetwood, right? So
Yeah.
you see Tommy Fleetwood where he does that hold off finish. I know Charles Howell does it too, but you look at Tommy do it, and you can see his face go from, you know, flexion to extension pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And he tries to go up, back, and around with it too. So,
Yeah.
but it's not like stopping. It's still going. So, I mean, I think that would be a good homework project for most coaches, is kind of look what he does from position 6 to position 8,
Yeah.
and what the handle and face does through the ball. It doesn't go like this. It's hard for me to do this here, but it goes pretty quick this way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if most golfers, even coaches, if we held the club in our lead hand,
Yeah.
and we stuck a T on the club face, and you just got your wrist working this way through impact, you're just holding it one-handed, and watch how quiet the club face is. There's a lot to that, I think. Far too often golfers are thinking, if you have a look at my watch, golfers think they've got to do that.
Yeah.
They think that's a release, where it's really a case of that further
Correct.
away. That's a release.
Correct.
And that's really what we're getting at here is, if players can quiet the face. I'm not saying have a low rate of closure. It might be somewhat high-ish, but it's not going to be excessive. It's not going to be excessive.
Yeah.
I think
that's the best thing, Andrew. I think you can't say it any better. I mean, there's no other way around it. Obviously we don't want that thing, you know, like this would be, the old way would be having this wrist, you know, toe up, right?
Yeah.
We wouldn't want to do that.
No. Dan, a good question here. Paul Wayland, how much does body rotation influence the rate of closure?
Great question. So, the pivot itself is kind of the governor. Now, I would say this, that the backswing and how you orientate wrist angles and load arms and everything, and the whole scheme of things is massively important. So if anything I do in the takeaway is going to influence what I do on the downswing. But I would say for sure that the pivot itself governs a lot of the timing aspect of what that lead wrist is going to do in time and space. So if I just stop my pivot, it becomes completely broken. So there's a little bit of, I have to speed this up. And I guarantee you, this kind of goes back to the very first thing, which was understanding, where the sweet spot's coming from, which enables and allows the body to do what it needs to do. So the average player with an open face, coming, down and across left, you get them to turn, they're just going to hit bigger slices. So I think understanding those two relationships, the pivot is always part of that relationship. And I think in the world of Instagram, like, everybody's captivated by pivot and hip turn.
Yeah.
But you've got to remember that the matchup to make that occur is that, sweet spot location, for sure.
Yes, big time. And I think my experience then is that people still don't really get that. They still don't get that, because my take is, if I'm on the way down and the tip of my finger is my club head, if I rotate more, look where the club head goes. The club head goes out. And the golfer instinctively knows, I don't want my club head to go that way. And so as a result, they stall their turn, they tip back to get that sweet spot back to the inside. If you, as a golfer or a coach looking to encourage golfers to rotate, we've got to get the club head back here, because if the club head's out the picture and I rotate, now it's working properly. And so
100%.
you hit the nail on the head there. If we're looking for more rotation, we need the club head more behind us.
Yes.
Club head.
Yes. Can't say it any better.
Cool.
That was perfect.
Cool. I think that's so important. And a cool word these days is matchups. And you understand them well. I'm starting to understand them better. And it really is interesting to see the matchups of, well, you look at Sergio. Sergio rotates like a maniac with very little forward drive.
Yeah.
Why? Because he's got that club head in the early part of the downswing way behind him. And then you look at other players where Tiger, for example, that club head is not super behind him. It's not super shallow. And so Tiger's always had quite a bit of drive, and he doesn't get his shoulders way open. Somebody said earlier, a question, Dana.
Yeah.
Does rotation of the body help with controlling the club face?
In it of itself, in a blanket statement, yes, it can. It doesn't necessarily. There's a lot of factors that go into that, right? So there's and there was actually a good one. So Todd brought in abduction, so that's part of the linkage of the whole system. So, if let's just say you're at the top of the backswing, everything's quote unquote perfect.
Okay.
All things being equal, the pivot, yes, will help dictate a more stable appearing face and less, twist, right?
Yeah.
Because we have wrist angles that are correct. We have an abduction transition system that's put together. So I would say yes, it's a blanket statement. However, if the swing itself isn't organized in a fashion that's correct, then no. Because your brain will know where that club face is, and will do just as you just said in the last discussion. It'll do everything it can to manage lining that face back up. Your brain knows if you've hit a golf ball before, your brain knows where the sweet spot is, and knows how to twist and put torque on that grip to line the thing up. Yeah, and it's misappropriation of torque essentially. So, yeah.
You must have over the years looked at Nick Price.
Yeah.
And the thing that Nick Price, great hitter, okay, amazing hitter. Yeah. The thing that always amazed me about Nick Price was how I don't think his hips were square at impact, but they were the most square visually out of all the great players, all the great hitters over time. The interesting thing to me, if I look at a picture of Price down the line at impact and Hogan down the line at impact, Hogan really open, Price not really open whatsoever. Yet on the exit, when that club's coming out under their lead shoulder, they're almost identical.
Yeah.
At that point there. Give us some insight, or just your thoughts on that and how that can work.
Yeah, so there's a captivation of rotation right now. So Price, we'll do the correlations that they both had, right? They both were very fast tempo.
Yeah.
Right. I would say Nick Price had more COM travel or a different moment arm look.
Yeah.
Than Hogan.
Yeah.
And he had a little bit different wrist condition coming down, right? So he had essentially less lead wrist flexion if you looked at it, on 2D. And primarily when that came in, it lined up more in a straight line. So therefore the pivot didn't have to be quite as open. Whereas if you look at Hogan, it came from a shallower disposition, not so much like Trevino, but more in that realm.
Mm-hmm.
So it matched up the pivot to it. I think that's something to kind of look at, is that Price, and I think overall, how long was that guy, a good ball striker? He was for a long time.
Yeah, if Price really could have rolled it better, he'd have won. He'd have doubled up his majors. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually had his putter, the bullseye, or no, the ram thing.
I can understand why I gave it away.
So but yeah, I think that's really the difference is this where that COM is, and where the sweet spot is coming in at 6 was slightly a little bit less behind. So therefore the body wasn't as open, but he still had his pivot, or exit, the appearance of it going on the same direction. And even club face, right? So Price didn't have that face wrapping over either. That's the big thing that I see between the two.
Okay. Dana, talk to us a little bit about transition. I know that's I think Mark Grace the other day said, transition is the new impact. 10 years ago, it was all impact, and now we're moving on to stuff that sets up impact. And give us your take on transition and what you're looking for.
Yeah, so for the masses of golfers, through transition, so let's illustrate P3. So lead arm parallel to the ground. Okay, so lead arm parallel to the ground is kind of the start of the transition.
Yes, well said. I like that.
So kind of looking at a couple factors first before we get to the top. So the first thing is, does the player have enough momentum in their golf swing to make their transition early enough to load joints and tissue? Okay, that's the first thing. I won't say that to a student, but it's something I'm looking for. So having a slow, deliberate backswing may or may not do that for the player. So that's kind of first, before I get into alignments. Now, the other thing that I kind of look for is the rib cage, and without looking at the lower body, but does the rib cage have enough rotation to support having the backswing go long enough and travel long enough to create a change of direction? Then I would look at things such as lead arm. Like, where's the lead arm? Is it out? Is it in? If it's too far in or if it's too far out, that's going to change kind of how the structure of how the shoulder and the scapulas load.
Yeah.
And then, and I'm talking like I'm talking to teachers. So
for sure, please do. I love it.
So, and then from P3, we also look at what the pressure's doing, right? So the pressure at that point should kind of be maxed out at P3 in the trail foot. Now, depending on the pattern where it is in the trail foot. And then from that point, if we illustrate going to the top, is the direction the hands go. Do they go up? Do they go back? Does the pressure kind of zero out? So if you're looking at like force vectors, do they go back to zero? Does the pressure go fast forward? Does it stay more centered, or does it stay more back? Like, kind of finding out what that does. And segmentally, you can see it on 2D from the caddy view. You can see what that does. And then really from there, it's really kind of seeing what the hands do relative to the transition. So from like 4 to 5, does the wrist respond appropriately? So does the trail shoulder respond? Does the lead arm respond? So it's kind of like a chain of events that's really responding to that transition. So, through that, if you get good separation through the rib cage, lower body, does the pressure max out underneath the lead foot, or does it stay back too long? Like, those are two, viable pieces here. And then does the lead arm stay in enough? For the average player, it better. Because if it gets too far out, like you said about your finger, we got a problem.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the big kind of keys. But if a player kind of loads their system properly, it definitely will influence the face early. And I think for the average player who's kind of throwing it out, having a good transition is going to let that shaft load and let the wrist do what they need to do. Just similar to any other sport. I mean, if you're a tennis player or a baseball player, conceptually the same idea.
Yeah. Would you say, and as I listen to you using the term load your system, I like that. It sounds to me like we're stretching, we're building up some stretch, and I like where you said, we got to get that tissue and that whole system kind of stretched out. And so that's really what you're looking for. You're getting loaded up, coiled up, so that the player can go.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a hot button. So one of the things that, and I've said this for a long time because of, prior influences, but when we look at it from 2D, and this is one of the beautiful things about where we are right now, and this is just my opinion, it doesn't mean I'm right, but
Yeah. It's where you currently stand.
Right, yeah. So when when I say the trail leg extends, right, so it straightens, it doesn't mean it straightens right off the golf ball. And it doesn't mean that I lock my trail leg out. Now, I might do that for a high handicap player who wants to get more depth. That might be an adequate strategy.
Mm-hmm.
But when I shift pressure to my trail leg, I essentially have moved that over there. Now, it doesn't mean I swayed over there, but my pressure spiked underneath my trail leg. I still have retention of flexion in that trail leg. And so as I'm winding my body up, I'm actually letting this extend, but allowing like my core and everything to create tension, right? Because that's what's happening. It's not just flinging my body to the right and not creating that. Now, I think that's probably the best way of kind of looking at things. But as a whole, when you look at guys like Cameron Champ, who creates a lot of speed, he just doesn't just straighten his trail leg. He winds into it and then allows it to extend because of that tissue loading. And so it kind of, you have two sides of the coin here. If I looked at it from my conceptual idea of I'm loading, that could mean I'm keeping trail hip flexion. And that the whole time, that might not be a good thing, right? Or conversely, on the other side of the spectrum, if I just go into extension with my trail leg right off the bat, I'm going to have a problem with loading my hip, right? So my body's too far forward. There's too much left tilt. I mean, so it can be perceived in two different ways.
That's really, I love the way you articulated that. That was very good. Instead of just going, well, yeah, we've got to get that leg extended. It's really the why behind getting it extended. And that's so important. That's so important. Dana, when you're giving a lesson on your tee, what technology do you use, and how do you incorporate it into a lesson?
You seen the movie The Manhattan Project? No, I'm just kidding. So really just, I'm pretty basic. I have things like K-Vest and things of that nature. I wish I had a swing catalyst in a building. That would be fantastic, but
I'm with you there.
It's in the sun all the time. And so, I have a tent. That's number one.
That's good. Got some shade.
I'm a ginger. So that helps, but really an iPad on a tripod and then a TrackMan. And those are generally it. And the TrackMan I don't use very often unless it's a new player coming in and I want to curtail the experience and learning for me and explain to them what their perception is before I say anything, right? That's number one. And it might not come out for a couple lessons if it doesn't need to, but if we specifically work on driver stuff, I use it all the time. So those are the two big ones, in reality.
It sounds the same as me. I got my iPhone, my iPad, and a TrackMan.
Yes.
And that's, I think you and I are pretty much in the same boat. We don't have a building. We teach outdoors, and that's what we got. That's what we got. Yeah, for sure. Let's see if we can find a question here, Dana.
Okay.
Let's see here. Handline. Dana, in your opinion, amongst better players, what is the first thing that happens in the downswing? This is Scott Higgins. What say you?
Okay, so this could go in kind of different realms. So first off, I'm really, really good at saying the right thing that pertains to me. Okay, so I would say that they're very good at understanding where their pressure shifts. Number one.
Okay.
I would
Okay.
say that would be probably the first thing, because it's kind of the first thing in the order, and that might be from 3 to 4. So I don't really, we can go into specifics on what their pelvis might do or what their rib cage might do, but it's really getting what that pressure does, right? It doesn't mean
Okay.
they're
And
sliding forward either, but it's recentered
yeah,
back to it depends.
and you said knowing where their pressure goes. Are you referring to lead side and how
Yeah.
quickly, or
Yeah.
what part of their lead foot?
Yeah. I mean, I think they inherently, it depends on the player, but inherently where that first pressure shifts for sure. And because that's kind
Okay.
of a result of that transition.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
generally not in the hands and the arms. So I'll tell you that.
Cool. Dan, you spend quite a bit of time out on tour. You stand on the range, you see those guys hitting shots, a whole broad spectrum of them. Would you say, because it does seem like in these events, the bigger events where we've got the shot tracker, it seems to me and a lot of golfers watching TV that maybe it's just coincidence that of late, there have been a lot of players who hit little butter cutters out there. What percentage would you say you see? And obviously, just generally speaking, do you see fades v draws?
Yeah, I would say off the tee, a lot of guys hit fades. I think especially the tour players. I think it's headed more in that direction. So I think it has a lot to do with the technology. The technology kind of leads to that, and the angle of attack leads to that.
Yeah.
Um, and then the guys that cut it, that are draw players, they tend to, and they're going to kind of squeeze one out there. They tend to kind of go down and left on it, and it might not be something that they normally would try. That's not their go-to shot, but if they want to squeeze the ball into a position, they can do that. Now, obviously, they can do that because they have the speed to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But I don't see now. Guys that draw the ball off the tee. You got Rory. Charles does that. There's quite a few that do that. But yeah, definitely it's more of where we are equipment wise. Now, iron players, I see a lot of guys draw it just because of angle of attack.
Yeah.
So they don't. We're not, when we say fade, they're not bending a ball a whole bunch.
Sure. It's
So
it's baby.
yeah, for sure.
And then when you're teaching those guys, when you're working with Charles, and he wants to hit his go-to draw or he wants to hit a fade, are you typically looking for on your TrackMan? Are you looking for a club path numbers? Are you looking for a range that you want him to stay between when it comes to a particular shot shape?
Yeah, I think number one is we're not looking for massive numbers. We're not looking for like 4, like
Okay.
nothing like that. It's kind of hedged towards 1.5 is kind of a good number.
Okay.
One of the things that he's changed a lot of has been angle of attack and swing direction. So those two things kind of matched up to a face that's less open through transition and coming down.
Yeah.
So, but those are generally, they're pretty tight on tour. You don't see guys that are, 3.5, 4 to the right, and unless they start aiming, more right.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll never forget. I think it was last year at Heritage, or 2 years ago. The Friday there was a storm coming in, and I stood behind the range watching the players hit, and the wind was blowing about 25 miles an hour straight in, dead straight in. And I stood back there watching the guys hit because no one was out on the golf course, and they thought they were going to get to go back out. They got called off.
Yeah.
They were, say, everyone was on the range, tons of balls flying. And it was incredible to me how, and you and I know this, but hitting into a headwind, if you put any bit of curve on it, it's going to get amplified.
Yeah.
How many golf balls flew like that into that very strong, dead straight in headwind?
Yeah.
And that told me there were not a great deal of +4s, -4s, club path wise out there. I think that's, I find that interesting.
Yeah. And they're throwing frisbees into that wind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. And I think, like, if I have a guy who swings at 100 or less, and they're slicers, and let's say they have access to a TrackMan, like you can train that in. And sometimes I train it in just like how a tour player would, is create an aim bias and be okay with that, because at 100 miles per hour, they're not going to be hitting it very offline if they have good face to path relationships. And you kind of,
you haven't seen me. I'm 100. I can hit it offline.
okay. But yeah, I think that's the big one. So if a guy's, extremely left, and you get him pushed over 3 to 4 rightward, and then maybe build in a little aim bias, they're okay. And if they're not practicers, that's kind of the strategy you got to go with.
Yeah. To get that, I must say, for the level of golfer that I teach, if someone came to me and said, Andrew, I just want to hit draws,
Yeah,
I would go, give me plus threes.
Yep.
Give me plus threes, 2 to 4, somewhere in there. Simply because I think most golfers, when they look at Charles Howell hitting plus 1.5s, they're going, that ball's dead straight.
Yeah.
He just hit a straight ball. Whereas you and Charles are looking at going, no, that clearly was a draw.
Right.
And I think the average golfer is looking at a lot of those inside the 1.5s, minus or plus.
Yeah.
They're looking at that going, that ball's pretty straight. And so
Yeah.
just the everyday golfer, I want to get them to curve it a little bit more, something a little bit more predictable, perhaps.
For sure.
Dana, if I may ask, we've got about 5 to 7 minutes left. I would like to ask, you've worked with Charles for a long time now. I remember Charles Howell when he was like 11. And he would take, I worked for Led way back in the day, and he was always out there, and he was taking lessons from everybody, and we just thought he was a cool little kid. He's come a long way. His golf swing has improved a tremendous amount under your tutelage. What are you doing as part of his coaching crew to help him win more events? What are you guys doing? What are you trying to tighten up, if we may ask? And
yeah,
So
from now, obviously, there's involvement with Grant over the years too. So
yes,
he was, I think that's important aspect. But I think, like, as of right now, it's really kind of looking at it from a perspective of longevity. So I know that to be relevant on tour, management keeping the speed up, because we don't want that to go down.
What is driver speed currently?
It's 120.
That'll work.
Yeah, and we've got them like to 125. So I think, and that's on the driving range, and it's just to kind of neurologically stimulate that component. But then the other side of this is, I think for longevity purposes, powering it with his body more efficiently is better than him kind of defaulting to old patterns, which could be like how his wrist conditions kind of reacted to his pivot, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So we've kind of had that going. And what's interesting is the message hasn't really changed. The strategies have changed a little bit over time. I think the overall guiding thing is, you get the player captured on 3D, have that 3D, talk to the 3D people, but also bring the trainers into that too. So who he's working out with is not conflicting with what he's trying to do with his swing. So cool. I think that's important.
Yeah.
So, but that's kind of it. And then as far as like how to win, and win events and stuff like that, it's, he has kind of a very good understanding of how to play the game.
Yeah.
And I think right now it's like how to create momentum. And then once you create momentum, then you can kind of, sorry, that thing paused there. But I think it's just developing momentum, and then how to, kind of sit back and let yourself win a golf tournament. I think those are the big things. So, that's what he's doing.
do you guys do a lot, sit down and look at stats much?
Yeah, so his caddy Nick is really big in that. So he has a statistician guy that he works with, and I think most players out there either do it with a statistician or have their caddies do it.
Okay.
But I think it's important to know, like, okay, well, the player already has a pretty good DNA makeup of how they've become successful getting on tour. So that's kind of a delicate scenario. It doesn't mean that they follow exactly what they do, but it kind of grooms their practice too. So
Yes.
if you struggle at 125, you know, you'll probably just hit more shots at 125. So,
Yeah.
but you know, sometimes, like, if you're not hitting your driver well, that can influence also, you know, if you're doing the club pro guy stuff where you're chipping out all the time, some of those numbers might get different. So I think that's an interesting facet with the tour too, because these guys are so good that, you know, half a shot here or there is insurmountable to my conceptual idea if I was to go play golf, right? Because they have it kind of built in.
Yeah, and that really seems to be a direction that a lot of the players are going, is how can they squeeze every drop out of their golf game? And statistics seem to be playing more and more of a role, and getting Dr. Brody, Richie Hunt, Scott Fawcett, those type of numbers people involved, so they can better understand where they're strong, where they're weak, and perhaps influence their practice and their decision making.
Correct. 100%. 100%.
Dana, what's your plans? Let's assume that you know, at some point this summer we get the doors open and we can get out there and start working back towards something that used to be normal. What are your plans for the year? You got some events you're going to? You got some golf schools? What's coming up, mate?
Yeah, so we're kind of, everything's up in the air. So we have LPGA schedule, PGA schedule kind of stuff. So we got to figure out where that falls. And then, you know, I think, I mean, I'm like chomping at the bit to get out and teach, right? So to get out on the driving range and just, and help students. I think physically, I think that's a good thing. I think that's good on both levels.
Yeah, I'm with you.
But yeah, I think that's a big one. And then just plan vacations.
Yes,
I want to go
must say, Terry's laughing at me because I've spent the last couple of days, I'm just like planning vacations. Okay, we're going here, we're doing this, we're doing this. Right. It's like we got to think about something good for a while. So, hey, Dane, it's been good catching up, my friend.
Definitely.
Stay safe, look after those beautiful ladies, and really appreciate you coming on and sharing. This was really good, and thanks for just going with the topic that I selected there.
Absolutely. No worries. No worries. By the way, I like your hat.
Thanks, Pod. Thank you. I like it too. I like those guys. It's a great company. And I must say, I take my hat off to you for getting out of the house and not waking those ladies up. You're a good man.
I try.
We need to try.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dana. Take care.
All right. You too. Thanks. Bye.